had a meager amount of money from a mortgage on my house. I'm a very curious person, and I got excited about new things, new ideas. So it wasn't that bad. I think the really important thing is first get something that the world needs.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to everyone tuning into the stream. An unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy advisor and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And a big thanks to our charity partner, Frank Water, and our sponsor for this season, Raymond James. And this season is focusing on legends. So we are absolutely honored and thrilled to welcome Dr. Andrew Benedek, who, when me and Will were brainstorming potential guests to invite, I know Andrew is one of the first people we thought of. So he's certainly a man who needs no introduction. In fact, the first winner of the very prestigious Lee Kuan Yew Prize and a highly distinguished career. In fact, he has been cited as a man who has revolutionized conventional water treatment. So Dr. Benedek, thank you so much for joining us, and great to see you again.
My pleasure, Tom.
So we've got lots and lots we know we want to kind of get through, and we certainly won't have enough time to cover your entire kind of fruitful career. But I think it's customary for all of our guests to maybe start with a little bit on their sort of origin story. So we'd love to kind of hear from you how you essentially kind of why water to start with, and then we'll kind of come on to the founding of Xenon after that.
Sure. So you have to put this in perspective. I graduated as a chemical engineer eons ago, 1966 to be exact. This was a period when industrial wastewater flowed without any kind of control into rivers, and municipalities had some limited wastewater treatment. Typically primary treatment, once in a while activated sludge, but that's about it. My first job as a young chemical engineering student during a summer was for a chemical company, and they were pressured by the government to figure out why the St. Lawrence is sinking beneath the plant. This was in Montreal. I'm a McGill grad. So they hired me. They really had no interest in finding a solution. At the end of the summer, I was pissed off, excuse my language. And I started to say, how can this be allowed? So I started reading, and I found Rachel Carson's book. This is at the very beginning of the environmental movement in America. This book really affected me, and I could see that there really is something wrong with unmitigated disposal of waste into our surface waters. But I left it at that until I had my first job out of school, working for Exxon, at which point I was, to be honest, thinking about going to graduate school to learn about water. So I was interested in water. And I noticed that we were doing the exact same thing as the plant in Montreal. We were putting the effluent of the refinery into the St. Clair River unmitigated. We called a consulting company who really didn't know much, because all they ever did is municipal plants. And when they heard the word phenol, they said, oh, it won't degrade. It's an industrial chemical. But they were obviously civil engineers, not chemical engineers. And I was watching phenol degrade in the laboratory. So I went to the environmental head, and I talked to him, and I said, we should really do something about this and try to build a plant And the answer I got was, there's no need for this because it's not harming the river and we can prove it to the government. So I said to myself, maybe there is a need, and maybe somehow we should develop some know-how, because there was no know-how for industrial wastewater treatment. And I left Exxon and went to graduate school. And I did a PhD in wastewater treatment. I couldn't do it in chemical engineering, so I took all my courses in civil. And then eventually I became a professor, and I thought, well, if we figure out how to treat wastewater, everything will be fine. And then it took me a while, but I realized that it's not going to be fine. But and I was a professor for 10 years before starting Xenon. And now we're talking 1980. So to put this in perspective, I started Xenon in 1980. To put this in perspective, 1972 is when the Clean Water Act was passed. It passed with a very significant majority, maybe 20, 30 congressmen objected. A Republican, Democrats, they were all aligned. Those were the good old days, right?
The good old days. That is so true.
Political parties aligned. Yeah, you don't hear about that very often.
Yeah, but in the end, water was and still is actually a relatively common ground. I mean, the first Trump presidency did not cut back on water investment, and hopefully this one won't either. But anyway, this was when the act was passed. There was tremendous interest, but not much know-how. So what I realized after 10 years of being in academia is that it's nice to write papers, but no one really reads them other than other academics. And I can't make an impact on the world staying in academia. And I also initially had some problems on moral grounds, just that we should not have the right to pollute a common good like a river or a waterway. And then I also realized that we're going to start running short of water. I started reading stuff like the Club of Rome, which was very concerned about the resources. Right. They were terribly wrong because they thought we couldn't survive 3.5 billion people. And as you all know, it's now 8 billion. So there is technology to thank for that. But for sure, I thought water is going to be in short supply. This turned out to be true, of course. So between the moral issue and the need for water, I figured the ultimate solution is to take wastewater and recycle it, clean it up. That way you avoid the moral problem. You're not polluting anybody's water. And you have more capacity, more capability. And then I started saying, so I started from that, wanting to make a difference, figuring out that recycling water is the right ethical and future way to go. And then the question was how? And I looked at nature, and I saw that everything in nature works by membranes. So after thinking about it, I figured if we could ever make membranes cost effective, if we could ever make them cheap enough so that it could be used in large municipal plants, this would be the way to recycle water. And so I started a company with the premise of developing membranes for water recycle. So that was 1980, but I had no money. I had only ideas, right? Like a typical academic. I had no business knowledge. I knew nothing about business, never took a business course. I had a book that my dean gave me, who was very interested in creating technology companies. He picked it up on a sabbatical at Stanford. So he was sharing it with me. I read the book. That was my education in business. And that book said that you should make everything a profit center. And I desperately wanted to have a mass spectrometer, which I couldn't get at the university because I wanted to find out. By this time, Love Canal was an issue and all the micropollutants. So I wanted to find out what's in the water, and that was the latest and best technology. And I had a meager amount of money from a mortgage on my house. I got some kind of government grant, and we started researching membranes using a mass spectrometer. And then because I read this book, we turned that into a profit center, meaning we started selling analytical services. So how weird is this? Every MBA would be, if an MBA submitted this kind of a business plan, he'd be shocked.
I love that. So I got involved in, well, the beginning of my career was with Superfund and Love Canal in Woburn, Massachusetts, and investigating and cleaning up, not necessarily treating, but sort of crude remediation right around that time. Yeah, it was the dawn of the environmental movement.
Yeah, you couldn't go a day without an article on pollution, so on and so forth, and water pollution in particular. Well, anyway,
I just going to say, I love how you kind of had these two factors colliding. You had you had 10 years in academia where you had this annoyance and frustration of environmental pollution, and then you sort of had the knowledge of actually we need new sources of water. And when you bring those together, it makes total sense that water recycling and purifying the contaminated water into something of value makes sense. But I can imagine in 1980, when you came up with the idea of recycling wastewater and actually giving up the career in academia and maybe, as you mentioned, looking to remortgage your house, what was the reaction from your kind of close friends and family? Did they say, Andrew, look, you're off, what are you thinking? Because normally when someone has, you clearly had that burning desire to make an impact, as you mentioned. There was a pain point with pollution, there was a market need, you created the profit center, but quite often, despite the vision and the factors pushing you into it, people around you might say, why would you want to do that? Was there a bit of resistance to you kind of suddenly going from academia into founding a business?
Undoubtedly, everybody thought I'm crazy. But
it's always a good sign with the vision, right?
No, if you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur,
right,
you truly have to believe in yourself. I never questioned that membranes are the way to go, and I'm going to find a way to do it. And not for 1 second.
So we refer to people like you, Andrew, as unreasonable people that challenge the status quo and believe in big ideas and forge ahead. So
with a little bit of luck, sometimes they get there.
Yeah, luck is a good thing, but you know what they say, you make your own luck too. So I'd say your timing was impeccable.
It was, as it turns out. And I was starting to tell you something really interesting. Today, or most of the time, what you're looking for is venture capital. Venture capital wants an MBA-like business plan, but they'll wind up ultimately controlling the company of an entrepreneur.
Right.
In my case, I got very lucky because I bought this mass spectrometer. And the government in Canada, I was in Canada at this time, really wanted to show they're doing something about pollution, but didn't know how and didn't want to be too tough on industry. So instead of putting out tough rules and the industry must meet it, they decided to put out analysis rules.
Hmm.
So everybody had to analyze what's in their effluent. It became a huge business, and only the people who are doing horse urine at racetracks knew how to use a mass spectrometer commercially outside of research labs. So we had one of the few, and we had the only one that was strictly an environmental lab, this profit center that we created. And I got the great good fortune of hiring a guy called John Coburn to head this profit center up. John was at the time the head of analytical chemistry at Environment Canada. As you probably know today, he is a venture capitalist. So he's done very well, thanks to Zenon and thanks to his new activity. In any case, this became a very profitable business, the lab business. So we could finance the membrane research and grow it. But then luck came along again. So shall I go on to the next?
Yeah. Before you do that, what did you pay for the mass spectrometer?
It was
Back then?
$150,000, $200,000. It was expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of money back then.
For a company with no venture capital funding.
Right. So keep going. I'm sorry.
But it paid back. We had like 30% plus net profit on the lab business, because we were competing with labs that were not focused on the environment, so they were much less efficient than we were.
But it meant you could bootstrap the business. You mentioned government grant, remortgaging the house. You instantly had revenue coming in from the lab business. You didn't need to turn to venture capital or give away equity in the company at that stage, right? So then you could
correct. We went
control everything, yeah.
All the way until we made a public issue the first time we gave shares away other than to employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then we developed membranes, and along came the problem with cryptosporidium in Milwaukee. I think this was 1993. By then, we moved from making membranes for small-scale industrial applications and started developing what has become a standard technology for wastewater treatment, the immersed membranes. We were the first commercial company to launch that. But we didn't have a market. Membranes were not yet a commodity. But once Milwaukee happened, EPA, in its wisdom, decided that membranes are the only safe way to treat water. And it launched the membrane market.
So it was crisis-driven market catalyst, essentially, because there was a necessity and the regulator got involved and there was a pollution incident. That was the catalyst to spur the membrane market forward. Yeah, I think you mentioned the word luck, and we talked a little bit about this with the previous guests, right, Will, Dragon Savage, in terms of chance and luck. And we had quite a good discussion about actually there is an element of luck, but there's an element of being in the right place at the right time and taking the gamble so that you were ready and you had the business. Okay, there was the catalyst because of the crisis, but you were in the right place and you took the gamble to sort of capitalize on that.
Exactly, but even more, another piece of luck that looked like a disaster. Remember, I was a professor, and once a professor, always a professor. I only spent 10 years being a professor, but it's a disease. And the disease is twofold. First, you think you're the smartest man in the room because your students don't know as much about your subject. And even if they're smarter than you, they don't dare tell you that because you're going to grade them. And second, you have this a strong desire to prove that you're the smartest guy in the room. So you keep inventing things. So if you're a professor, you're gonna keep inventing. As soon as you invented one thing, you invent another thing. So Xenon was not just a membrane company. We were a lab company, as you heard. We were also in one other business, which was trying to fix a problem at airports. Anyway, that business got in trouble because it was badly managed, and I had to make some hard decisions. This was in 1995. We were already a public company, and the whole company was in danger of going under. So I really thought about it, and it was very clear that we really got to focus on membranes. The time is right. We got to jump both feet into membranes and give up on everything else. So with a heavy heart, I had to sell our laboratory because we needed the cash. And this was our cash machine. And I also had to stop, get rid of everything but membranes for drinking water or wastewater. We even got rid of our industrial business to some extent. We just focused ultimately a limited amount of industrial and mainly focused on municipal, and that's where we made our investment. And we created, we increased our membrane production. We focused on the municipal market, and we were very fortunate to have another very capable person to be my partner in this. That was Diana Muraro, who had the skill set to understand membranes and figured out how to commercialize. So this is a big issue for every company. It's the scale up. So we figured out that the critical factor in scale up is having representatives across the country and supporting them well. The other factor that was huge is that one of the consulting companies at the time, CH2M Hill, had a technically competent person, who was an ex-professor like me. His name is Glenn Diger. You may have.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Yes. So Glenn came to visit at one point and understood the potential of what we were doing. He was probably the only consultant who could have understood it or would understand it. And CH made a turn. They really endorsed the technology. They didn't work exclusively with us. There was another company around at the time for water, Memcor. So they had some alternatives, but they really focused on using membranes for water. This was tremendously good for them. They went from, I think, number 4 to number 1. At one point, a few years later, I counted the jobs in Canada. Out of 21 wastewater jobs, they had 19.
Wow.
They became dominant in supplying membrane technology. They never went exclusive with anybody. They did the usual, design, bid, build model.
Right.
But it was very good for them.
There's a connection with Singapore, right? Because I was looking through the citation for your you were the first Lee Kuan Yew Prize winner, and
Yeah.
I remember, well, so with Glenn Daiger, we did years ago a top 25 industry leaders for a number of years, and Glenn won it. And I remember speaking to him about the kind of the new water and water reuse revolution in Singapore. But in your citation for the prize, it says, the development of new water was made possible as a result of Dr. Benedek's diligent research and pioneering work in membranes. So was there a collaboration or connection with CH and the work in Singapore as well?
Totally.
Yeah.
Bedok, the very first water reuse, new water plant, that was CH Hill and Zenon.
There you go. There's a connection. Yeah. So new water is because we mentioned in 1980 the kind of that vision of wastewater recycling and people saying, look, Andrew, you're crazy, and then kind of seeing it meeting the right people along the way, and then the new water project in Singapore has arguably been seen as kind of the part of this leading hydro hub in water, and has led to many other projects on a similar nature. So how do you sort of see where the sort of reuse market is going now? Because that's a little while ago, and I've been writing and reporting on this since about 2010, and get a little bit of frustrated, I think, to see that technologically we can make it happen and create purified water, but the uptake in projects has still been relatively slow.
Well, the market is growing. So if you look at our business, let's say 20 years ago in membranes, it was mostly water. If you look at the market today, mostly drinking water. If you look at the market today, wastewater membranes, MBRs, are threefold bigger than water membranes. So definitely it's grown tremendously. And if you look at water reuse plants, wastewater plants for water reuse, it's double-digit growth for the last 20 years.
Yeah,
so I think it's going to continue. So we have obviously the population issue, and we have climate change. And someone wiser than me said water is the if climate change was a shark, water is its teeth, right? So we really see climate change in the water sector. It's going to be a very significant factor.
Yeah, as a driver of water reuse. So just to come back on the Xenon, I mean, you essentially, the business was sold to General Electric, to GE.
Yeah.
Can you sort of talk through that period of the kind of journey of from 1980 to kind of growing and then selling your baby, if you like, and kind of, which I know for any entrepreneur can be a time of celebration, but at the same time a little bit of mourning as well, because you spent such a big period of your life building and scaling, and then you have to kind of let go.
Yeah, it's a interesting challenge. So when I went through different phases. So at one point, when I knew that we have the right answer, we proved it and so on, I actually said, okay, well, I've done what I'm good at. I should think about moving on. But I felt that it won't get a return to my shareholders. So I buckled down, and I had the team around me, and we focused on creating a really strong commercial company. So so phase one, I'm the professor inventing things, too many things. And then phase two, focus, get the right solutions, prove them. Phase three, move on and make it into a worldwide commercial success. But as the company was growing, it needed stability. It needed some stronger financial prowess. And I thought also that maybe I'm not the right guy to lead it into the next phase when it becomes a global powerhouse, so to speak, and provide the solutions. And GE was keen to become a large player in this sector. And GE at the time had the reputation of being the world's most respected company. So when they approached us, I thought it was an honor that my baby moves on to such a respected company. I thought it'd be good for the employees. And also, I couldn't refuse the offer because it was almost 50% above the share price.
That's a good deal.
It actually, interestingly, Xenon has had the best return to shareholders of any water company, at least in one study that I've looked at.
Wow.
So consistently increasing value with some peaks and valleys, but
right
over its public life, I think it averaged something like 20% plus annual growth in value, share price. So anyway,
yeah, pretty decent growth rate.
So after G bought the company, they really didn't want any help from me, and I was glad because I didn't want to interfere. So I started working at UC San Diego, and actually moved to San Diego. And it was interesting, but as you know, I got in trouble because I got interested in climate change now. So,
you're an unreasonable person.
I did have some issue. I had some issue personally because I was Mr. Zenon, and now I was not, right? I mean, I lost my identity. But I'm a very curious person, and I got excited about new things, new ideas. So it wasn't that bad.
Andrew, what are you curious about now? Like, you talked about these phases in your journey, your curiosity journey. What are you curious about now? Like, where are you going to go next?
Well, in between Xenon and now, I was curious about climate change. And I thought, okay, if I could figure out something similar to water, maybe I can be helpful, or I can help someone else figure it out. So I can get into that if you want. But now that I'm only a director at Energia, the company I founded subsequent to Zenon, now I'm interested, actually, I'm working on a book. And I'm really interested in how the world works. So I'm going bigger and bigger scale in my thinking and less in my doing.
So what's the book on? So is it kind of continuing to explore water and climate, or?
I think more about how society makes decisions. The balance, because I mean we see that we're having issues, and with climate change in particular, you see that in spite of the rhetoric and the obvious impending doom, there's a lot of things that happen that don't allow us to make progress, and we could, because we have immense technological capability. We can put it to work and we can make miracles. Like membranes, as an example, was super simple. We got a long way to go because nature is dramatically more sophisticated than we are.
Right.
But we could still take a technology that everyone thought would never work, particularly for wastewater, and now it's a standard. And we see that in every field, every day.
So when is the book coming out?
Oh, it's I'm working on it, but not very efficiently. So I don't know. Let's not go there.
Okay, I can appreciate that. I've never met a book deadline that I liked, so I get it.
Do you I've heard this before, when you've got a successful entrepreneur who's come up with an idea, a vision, they've scaled, they've sold the company. For many people, you would think, okay, that's enough, you've proven yourself, right? But it's almost, in musical terms, like the second album syndrome a little bit. It's like, actually, I know I've done it once, then I've got this kind of hunger to do it again and almost not prove myself, but you're so used to that culture of being crazily driven to kind of build and scale that company that you miss it, and then you go, okay, well, I want to. Was there a little bit of that between, you think, Xenon and Energia? Because I remember seeing you speak in Singapore once, and you mentioned you were academia, then Xenon, and then between Xenon and Energia, a bit of academia, and like, hey, okay, I'm a bit frustrated, I want to go back to the commercial world.
Well, I had no plans to start another company. I wanted to hide in academia and just, practice my curiosity.
Right.
But then I started learning more about climate change. I was working with people that were watching the ocean at Scripps Institute. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that this is a huge problem, maybe even bigger than the water problem. And I got very interested in seeing if there's a solution, but I had no intention of starting a company. I actually went to Germany. Oh, sorry. So when I first looked at the problem, let me go backwards a bit. When I first looked at the problem, I thought, really the key, I could see that solar is going to be key for electricity, but unless we find a replacement fuel, we're not going to solve climate change. And the lowest cost replacement fuel, I believe then, and I still do now, is basically biomethane, which we call in America RNG. In Europe, it's biomethane. So I started looking into biomethane because I also knew something about digesters, being an ex-wastewater professor. So I looked at American companies and I couldn't find any interesting technology. And at that time, Germany had an energy law that was signed in 2000. And it's thanks to that law, by the way, that we have significant advance in commercializing solar turbines, and also biomethane. So after going there, I thought, I'm just going to invest in a German company as a minority investor. I don't want to get involved in managing it and bring it to America. But then I got into trouble because the company I really was interested in was going bankrupt. And so I rescued it. And all of a sudden, my wife and I became the bosses of that company. By the way, Diana Murado, that ran the municipal sector, ultimately became my wife. So she's a very capable woman in her own rights. So the two of us bought this company in Germany, and then we came back to San Diego and started a company here in Canada to commercialize the technology, and we wanted to apply it to wastewater treatment, which is a sector we knew, and we knew that every wastewater plant every big one has a digester. So we thought, first of all, we shouldn't waste that gas. At that time, almost all the gas was flared. Some of it was used for heating, but none of it was used for electricity or other replacement of fossil fuels. So we thought there's a huge opportunity, and we can make a difference in replacing fossil fuels with biogas. And that was the idea behind Energia. This is a company where we applied all the same principles that we did at Xenon, but ultimately this was not as successful, not as yet that successful. And so there's some lessons I learned along the way. I used the exact same methods, and even worse, I had a lot of money to invest. So in the first case, I had no money. Maybe that was part of the problem.
The Zenon had to remortgage the house, and then with Energia, yeah, you had the money from the sale to GE, right, to get things moving.
Exactly.
That's a great quote.
So was the focus, because you mentioned biomethane, on, you said wastewater, which was obviously linked with the previous time, but also food waste in terms of as a feedstock, which is, I was looking at some numbers earlier, it's about what, 8 to 10%, right, of what's the number? 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions are from food loss and waste, which is crazy, right? I mean, ideally we wouldn't lose food, you wouldn't waste food in the first place, but it's incredibly, yeah, across the supply chain through to even household level of people buying food and throwing it away. So that was essentially a target resource for you to turn it into an energy source, right?
You got it 100%. So first, methane leaking out of landfills and from fossil fuel operations, essentially, plus agriculture, cows belching and so on, is almost as big a problem as carbon dioxide on the near term, on the 20-year horizon. So people are starting to realize that. I realized it when I got involved in the first place. And so controlling it is super important so it doesn't go in the atmosphere, and also a great opportunity to turn into fossil fuels, a replacement for fossil fuels. And if we do that, we actually can cool the planet, believe it or not, in the short term. So it's by far the low-hanging fruit in the climate change fight. And using wastewater plants is a great opportunity because we already have the infrastructure, which is so hard to get in developed countries, and we can increase significantly the capacity of these digesters and bring the food waste that will wind up otherwise in the landfill. So that was the concept of Energia. I'm proud to say that we have developed the technology, we have demonstrated the technology at big scale worldwide. So we set the stage for a really great company, but I didn't have the kind of luck I had at Zenon in terms of the drivers and the clients being receptive. The client being receptive is the issue, particularly the waste industry. that really makes its money from putting its waste in the landfill. So
Right.
the biggest problem I've had is we took a big risk. We built a $200 million plant. And on the basis of Los Angeles actually enforcing a contract they had with the waste companies. And Los Angeles didn't. They didn't enforce the contract. They're not meeting state law. So we actually had to bankrupt that plant. That's what I mean by bad luck. Bad luck fighting against, like Don Quixote fighting against a bigger force.
Tilting at windmills. Yes.
Tilting at, it felt like tilting at windmills. So we went back. Now I retired from being CEO of Energia. The company is still a strong company. It's rebuilding itself in spite of this mistake, and it is going to focus on promoting the technology, which is less risky than having to bet on waste companies giving you the waste.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you keep diverting food waste to landfill, but you need to make sure landfill tax is increased to make sure it's diverted away from landfill. So yeah, I'm convinced the waste to energy market using that food waste will get more momentum, but it's just a case of time. So you mentioned
it's a case of political will.
Political will, yeah.
Against people that want to alter that will. So even in the UK, by the way, Tom, there's a landfill tax, which we don't have here in America. But when you really look at it, nobody pays it. The waste companies find ways around it.
I remember back in the day of, I was actually editor of this very glamorously called magazine. One of my first days of publishing was called Recycling and Waste World.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, the UK's #1 magazine in recycling and waste. But I remember visiting some AD plants, Biogen Greenfinch. We did a whole supplement on anaerobic digestion and biowaste, and yeah, I did some work with the Waste and Resources Action Program, which was kind of a government quango on the collection of food waste, right? And giving households these little caddies and the liners, and then pickup trucks to collect enough mass of this material to then keep the plants running. So that was in a former lifetime. So I do remember it quite well. But to kind of wrap up, Andrew, you mentioned you're now retired from Anaergia. You're kind of writing the book, but what sort of looking back where things have worked out well and things perhaps haven't in some projects and things, for all kind of budding tech entrepreneurs that are listening and at an early stage of their company journey, what sort of advice would you give?
Well, it depends on the sector, but if you're talking about the
just in the water sector, yeah. Say someone, because in the last few years there's been a notable amount of kind of new membrane companies that have got quite chunky raises of capital. But say they're listening and they look to you as like a legend who's been there, done it, built a company, sold the GE. What would sort of be your closing advice to them?
Well, I think the really important thing is first get something that the world needs, right? And get that to the point where it can be scaled. And in that process, watch your money, because it's always going to take longer and more money. And this is kind of obvious. I'm sure you guys have given the same advice. But now, in terms of getting it out once you have it, will you look like you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to hold on to your money. Great advice. Don't borrow money unless you really have to, and I've learned those lessons along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So we agree.
We agree.
Now, if you're in the water sector and you're in America or a developed part of the world where consultants dominate, like I described my relationship with Glenn, you got to find two things. Either and ideally both. You got to find a visionary plant manager. Typically, these plant managers are the ones that actually understand technology and don't need so much advice, and want to make a difference for their ratepayers. And second, you ideally also want to find a consulting company like we did, but you have to have luck and find, again, in a consulting company, someone who's able, because of his technical prowess, take a risk on new technology. Finally, in the water sector, you got to multiply your capability, and we are very fortunate to have wonderful representatives in this sector. We don't have it in all sectors, but in the water sector, there are many representatives who are technically competent, and if they really believe in you and you provide good service to them, they'll pick up your technology and find you the opportunities, find you the visionary plant managers or the visionary consultants. And when you put all that together, the most important ingredient I left last, it's the people. So a couple of lessons I've learned over the years. If you're in a new technology, you often can't find people. Like there was no membrane people when I was building Xenon. And so the biggest reason for Xenon's success, to be honest, is that I had the wisdom to develop our own people. So we went to the universities, found the best graduates we could, and we trained them. And we trained them slowly. We didn't do like 3 months here, 3 months there kind of training. We kept them a couple of years in a role and then promoted them afterwards. So by the time I sold the company to GE, we had something like 800 college graduates that we hired, trained, developed. And that's the reason Xenon, under its various owners, is still a very strong company. Because all these young people are still there. And the other hard part, of course, is managers. Managers that are technically competent, so they understand it. In a technology company, you can't have a manager who doesn't understand the product well. He can be a wonderful manager, but he won't succeed. And being a manager and a technically competent person, customer-oriented, is an extremely hard thing to find. I was fortunate that I found Diana and some other people like her. But in general, this is the critical piece. And maybe one last thing, you have to match people. I found early that everybody has weaknesses. And if as a manager, I focused on their weakness, then I kind of destroyed them. So after a while, I flipped around. I focused on everybody that I managed. I focused them on their strength, because that's how they get empowered and self-confident, and found a complementary person whose strength was the opposite. So every division I had like 2 people managing it. One was more sales-oriented, the other was more operation-oriented. And that's exactly what I did to myself too. That's why I needed John Coburn.
They say that, don't they? Is figure out your own weaknesses as well, and then hire people that are better than you in that weakness, right? And surround yourself.
Exactly.
Andrew, thanks so much. Some absolute golden nuggets at the end there. I think to all kind of tech entrepreneurs is find that visionary consultant to sort of come with you on the journey and believe in what you're doing, and it can open all sorts of doors. And yeah, I love how you kind of, you know, recruited the best, strongest graduates and trained them up into the way of thinking on membranes in the company, as well. So yeah, phenomenal work. So thanks so much for joining us. It's been really interesting to hear more of your story and share it with the world as well. So Will, final kind of closing remarks from yourself.
So I can't wait to read your book, and I'll be patient, because it's a tough topic to tackle. You really invaluable insights. My favorite line from you is practice my curiosity. Acknowledging that is a driver for you and ensuring that you have time and a place to do that. That was really impactful for me.
It's been a pleasure to chat with you guys, and hope we can help all those entrepreneurs that will shape our future.
Amazing.
We're trying.
The work to be
Andrew,
done.
wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Andrew, thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Cheers.
Be
guys.
well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.